So let's talk about one of the hottest ingredients in the industry right now, which is protein. Everybody's talking about protein. Hi, Sarah. How are you?
Hi, I'm
Good to
good.
see you.
Yes, you too.
Um, how are things on the East Coast?
They're hot and sweaty,
Are they?
which is my preferred kind of environment to exist in. If I'm
Well,
not
here.
sweating, I'm not happy.
Okay, good. Well, don't come here then. It's cold and rainy, believe it or not.
That's weird. That's
I,
weird when they flip like that.
I know, but anyway, we have lots to talk about today,
Yes.
and so welcome to our podcast. We're talking about
Thank you.
protein. I'm here with Sarah, a registered dietitian, and has been a great resource to harm and a health and wellness expert for well over a decade, specifically on like gut health and women's health. Um, Introduce yourself, Sarah, and then we can talk about protein today, which is going to be really exciting, I think.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Like Walter said, I'm a dietitian and I've never really kind of fit into a normal dietitian box. I'm always kind of challenging and questioning everything. So it's been a really fun ride as a very curious dietitian to get into gut health, to look at nervous system regulation, to understand supplements and food. So I'm really grateful that I get to play in this wellness world.
Well, we're really happy to have you here, and I'm Walter. I'm the co-founder at Hum, and for us, we are a science-first company that really prioritizes research, but at the same time as well, always focuses on the health of our consumers with clean ingredients and really with ingredients that move the needle. So let's talk about one of the hottest ingredients in the industry right now, which is protein. Everybody's talking about protein, and I thought, why not chat about it? Because I have so many questions about like what kind of protein, how much protein, what is too much, what is too little, can it help with weight management? I mean, there's just so many things I would love to discuss today, but it is literally everywhere. We see it on social media, the endless trends. It is just like, and I'm confused. So I'm wondering, are you confused as well, or do you have a really clear perspective on protein and know what's right for the consumer?
I mean, it's funny. I mean, there's always new information, but as a dietitian, protein is like the least sexy thing because it's so foundational in our education of what's important for the body. So it's just fascinating to see kind of like this rebranding or re-excitement around protein. So I'm excited to dive into it.
Protein is now being linked not just to like building muscle, right? But it's also like about longevity, general health. I mean, they're just they're endless studies. And maybe, we can sort of like think about it. Like, how should we think about it as protein first and foremost? Is it really this universal tool that can help with so many things, or is it primarily something to build muscle while you're exercising? Walk me through that for a second.
Yeah, so this is why it's so exciting as a dietitian to talk about protein because it's one of our main macronutrients. And without protein, we're not doing so well as humans. We're not surviving because it's so critical in so many processes in our body. I think, like you said, there's that correlation to like, oh, yeah, protein helps me build muscle mass. But it also plays a really critical role in immune activation and making your immune system more effective at doing its immune system work, like killing pathogens. It's also really important when it comes to building hormones. And it's just like so foundational for every aspect of life that when we are protein malnourished or we don't have enough protein, like I said, it's just not a good place to be in. So it's really critical. Without it, we don't
And
live.
and let's is there such a thing as a sort of like agreed amount of protein that people should be adding to their diet? And is there a difference between
Yeah.
women and men? I'm just curious.
Yeah. So in the nutrition world, there's so much room for interpretation. But if you look at clinically researched recommendations, like for me as a trained dietitian, and if you look at all the research, it's zero point 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight is how you technically calculate protein in men and women because we're looking at weight status. So that's kind of like gold standard calculation. You can go up to 1.2 grams if you are more active or I mean, I used to do a lot of these calculations in the hospital. So my reference is like, if you have a burn or if you have more immune activation, like then you can go higher protein requirements, but generally that 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight is the accepted recommendation. I've seen many things on the internet as to like, you should do it this way, you should do it this way. And there's actually more research now leaning into perimenopause and menopausal women and showing that there's more benefits to higher protein calculations, but they just haven't really released like, here's the firm standard.
And can we translate this into pounds for a second? Because I'm used to kilos, as I can tell by my accent, but I'm just curious, can we make it easy for people listening? So like, is
Yes.
it roughly like half a gram of protein per pound, or like, how should we think about it? I just want to translate it in a very
Yeah, it's
user-friendly way.
I think that's probably like a half a gram. I think it's like 0.3 technically, but
Yeah.
we can say half and you're still going to estimate on an average, like
As a,
fall into the right category.
as an easy hack, right?
Yeah.
And tell me a little bit about the different, because a protein is made of amino acids, right? How many total amino acids, and does every protein contain all these amino acids?
Yeah. So amino acids, I always think of as these little building blocks. And we have 20 amino acids that we can build proteins out of. 9 of them are essential, meaning our bodies can't make it. So we have 11 little building blocks of protein, 11 amino acids that our bodies can generate internally. But
Hmm.
9 of those we have to consume. So that's essentially what a protein is. And you can have incomplete protein and complete protein. So something like what's really hot right now, collagen is an incomplete protein because it doesn't have all essential amino acids. So that's how we kind of think about it and define it in the science world.
Well, I believe it's missing one amino acid. Is that correct? What is it called
Yeah.
again? Remind me.
It's missing tryptophan.
Tryptophan. There we go.
Yeah.
So let's say I want to take my collagen, right? Could I
Mhm.
add tryptophan to it and then I have my complete protein, or does it not work like that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. You can source it from wherever you want because what your body will do is it'll process it and it'll pull those amino acids together and then it can create complete proteins.
That's so
So,
interesting. But I
yeah.
think, collagen is just a great addition. You can pop it in your coffee or in so many things. It's a really easy way of taking protein
Yeah.
minus that amino acid. And I'm always looking for ways of increasing my protein intake. I'm just not really good about that. But like, do you think there's a reason why now? Because protein has been around forever. Like we've been in this industry for like
Yeah.
decades now. And well, I have it's like I'm for
I'm
long,
I'm I'm 2 decades in.
like so there we go, right? Tell me a little bit more about like why is protein suddenly having such a moment? It's been around for a long time.
Yeah, that's where I was like, gosh, as a dietitian, it's not that sexy because we talk about it all the time. And I wonder, with that being said, like there's just so much more health education. And when we do kind of correlate it to immune activation and hormone regulation, it just opens up a broader conversation around protein. So it could just be that it's getting kind of a new, fresh lens, and people are being educated about the importance of it in so many different angles. And where it was just usually like, oh, if you want to build muscle, you eat protein. Like that was the general idea.
Yeah.
But now there's a hunger and there's an appetite for nutrition education and learning more about how our bodies work and longevity, like you said. So I think there's just more interest in these conversations around macronutrients and protein specifically.
That definitely is. And I would also argue perhaps before it was about like losing weight a little bit, but now there's also this element around like wanting to be strong, like stronger muscle that are protecting your body, right? Your joints, your bones, etc. I think there's a big conversation around that too, where people actually live longer. And as a result, they want to make sure they maintain their body in the best possible way. And
Yes.
that's where protein may be trending a lot. But I'm really curious as well around this idea of like taking a lot of protein, because I've seen things on social media, which I obviously am really curious about what your perspective is.
Yeah.
To take a lot of protein, you have now protein bars of almost 30 grams of protein. You have more and more diets, including protein, literally cutting everything else out pretty much and just getting as much protein in as possible. What's your perspective on what is too much protein? let's say for the average person and for an athlete, because I do think there's a big difference potentially, right?
Yeah.
And let's also talk about the side effects you can get and like the kind of signs that your body will tell you if you're taking too much protein.
Yeah, so if, it wouldn't be the wellness world if we didn't push it to the extremes. And this kind of brings an interesting topic because we have our standardized research where clinically in a hospital, this is the way that I have to operate as a dietitian. And then we have the wellness world where we can kind of push the boundaries. And sometimes we see when we push those boundaries, the science then kind of catches up with these new ways of doing things. So I think we might see, like we're seeing in the perimenopause and menopausal women, we might see more protein or higher protein recommendations being validated in the future. I think we can obviously overdo it where like I see people recommend often like a pound or 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. That's kind of like one I've seen floating around where I think that's still appropriate. I don't think you're going to overdo it, but getting up to like 2 grams of protein per pound of body weight, that's going to start putting strain on your kidneys. And that's where you have to really distinguish like, am I able to process this? Does my body actually utilize it? Or am I just dumping so much protein in that now my resources that break it down and remove it, our kidneys, they're being overburdened and they have to work really hard. So you can, do blood work and you can measure that in your body. You can measure kidney function through a GFR rate, BUN, creatinine. Those are all markers that can help you just establish and understand, like, are you going too hard? Or like just tuning in and being like, oh, I ate 50 to 80 grams of protein and I'm like so uncomfortable. Like there's ways to tap in and not override those sensations too, where your body's like, that was too much.
Well, you mentioned the kidney specifically, and I do think that kidney stones can be a result of like taking too much protein in your diet. Of course, there may be other factors, but that's probably one to pay attention to, I suppose. And you also mentioned something which really piqued my interest was which was perimenopause, right? Explain to me a little bit the research between the connection of like higher protein intakes and when you're going through perimenopause.
Yeah. So really the correlation there is looking at, do you have adequate stores of amino acids to make hormones? Because perimenopause is this huge hormonal shift for women where we stop making as much estrogen, progesterone, like all those levels are dropping and that impacts everything. So the idea and the thought is if we can maintain adequate protein intake, then we have more resources to pull from to build hormones, to build muscle. As we're like, when we think about aging, having more protein and muscle mass is really, really important for longevity. It helps protect our bones. It just helps us as women and men age more gracefully.
Yeah, and I think the moment you hit a certain age, it's particularly critical because that's when like your muscle mass starts to go south, basically, right?
Yeah.
Do you know what that age roughly is, or is it case by case, depending on your sort of like biological age?
Yeah, well, for women, it's typically when we start approaching that perimenopause age, which can happen in your early 40s to 50s. So it's in that time frame where things start to change. Men are probably going to hit it a little bit later because they don't have such pronounced hormone fluctuations. But we do start to see, like, I would say, as we get to our 40s and 50s, where you're going to start to see that testosterone decline a little bit more, which does impact your ability to maintain muscle mass.
That's so helpful. And, obviously protein can be in so many things. There's plant-based protein, there's protein in
Yeah.
fish, there's protein in meats. Tell me a little bit more about the differences here. Like, do you have a perspective around like plant-based protein versus, let's say, whey protein, for example, versus meat-based protein?
So there's something called bioavailability, and
Hmm.
that is looking at how effectively does this protein absorb into our bodies. So it is proven that animal-based proteins are more bioavailable, meaning that we can just integrate them a little bit more efficiently. That doesn't mean that plant-based proteins are not effective. We're still able to utilize them. So for me, it's always just looking at how does somebody feel? What do they have an inclination towards? Like, do they want to be plant-based? Do they want to incorporate more animal protein? And then just really looking at how do we optimize quality of your diet? Because you can achieve health and wellness through plant-based protein, through animal-based protein. it really comes down to like what feels the best in your body. If you're, on that plant-based or vegan or whatever, and you're just like struggling to get up in the morning and you're bloated and your hair's falling out, then like we should probably look at what's going on.
Well, there was a really interesting study by the NHS, the National Health Service in the UK, and I think over 40,000 participants were followed for longevity, really, and they looked at like how diet plays a role here, and
Yeah.
those with a higher protein intake actually had higher markers of longevity, so they aged better. In other words, out of like I think the 40,000 participants, about 3,500 had that sort of like reached that, and then they looked at this group, and obviously the big difference was that these people had higher protein intakes. And interestingly enough, and that's something I would love to get your perspective on, those who had more plant-based protein tended to do a little bit better than those that were consuming animal protein. Maybe it's other things that go into, the production of protein. Some like, is typically a plant-based protein a bit cleaner, let's say, versus an animal-based protein? Does it really, is it a question of like the exact protein that you're taking, and like it is a very granular perspective one has to like look at this, but like I'm just curious what your thoughts are, because I was like really, because I had always had this idea around bioavailability, and but then I saw this piece and it sort of like slightly puzzled me, if you will, because it didn't fit this part of like I would say the logic.
Well, there's quality also. I think
Mhm.
that's a huge part of the conversation because you can have a low quality protein that's just covered in chemicals, that's bioengineered, and still be considered protein. So you really have to look at the quality, but also like what else it has. Most people don't just eat protein in isolation.
Yeah.
We're eating it as a part of a larger food. And so when we eat more plant-based protein, we're getting things like polyphenols and flavonoids and fiber, which are all really beneficial for our body's function overall. And to me, like those are key indicators in your diet of longevity if you're getting all these things, because that's feeding your gut.
100% in fiber. We know we spoke about that in
Yeah.
another podcast. Really, fiber is a key ingredient to longevity as well, because it helps with so many things, including heart health, digestive health, etc. And again, it's one of those key ingredients. And I think like linking it back to the plant source, that makes total sense to me. I'm just curious for you, what are the red flags when you pick a protein? Are there any, or are you very much of the sort of like school of thought where you like, look, as long as you get your protein, it's better
No.
than
No. No, I'm very particular about what I eat and the quality. So for me, I'm always looking at how can I get the highest quality of protein? If it's animal protein, can I source it from somewhere that I trust? Like we're outside of Philadelphia, there's a lot of farms out here. So going to a local farm and getting my meat there is like my ideal choice. If I'm in the supermarket, it's always finding, some type of grass-fed organic quality meat. Knowing that quality is going to be like, it's just so important because protein is not protein. Even
yeah.
in that case, like if you're eating protein from a corn-fed, antibiotic-fed cow, and then you're eating a cow that's been raised in pastures and exposed to sunshine and with its other cow friends, it's a different quality of protein. It's not, it just matters. So for me, quality is really important. I'm always looking at how can I source that? And with plants as well. Is it organic? Is it grown locally for me is a big one because then there's more nutrients available in that food.
And how about a protein shake versus a protein through your diet? Obviously sometimes we're busy. Sure, we would love to make that lovely dinner, but we just don't have the time. We're just gonna grab like a quick protein shake. Any perspectives around that? Like what's more beneficial or less beneficial?
I'm a huge fan of protein shakes. I spent a lot of my career researching protein shakes and what does blending your food actually do to your body and your digestion. So I find that it's a great way to get more of those important nutrients like the fiber, the polyphenols, the vitamins, minerals. You can get a lot of that by blending up your food. And then the protein powder, again, going back to quality, as long as it's not this like over processed chemical added powder, it's going to be a really healthy, beneficial food to incorporate in your diet.
Thank you. Well, that's so helpful. And I have a couple of other things I want to discuss with you. But before we do that, are there any trends that you feel really excited about at the moment, and maybe some that you're not so excited about?
With protein. Um,
Could be protein, could be anything. Like, let's do our well yes and well no. I'm just curious what, which trends you're seeing at the moment that you feel really
I mean, I'm really
excited about.
dorky. I'm like anything around data. I think what's really cool is this kind of movement towards having personalized access to our health and seeing more of like lab values. And even I know AI can be a tricky topic, but like it's here and it's really fascinating when we look at how does it analyze research and data and tell
I'm a
stories with
I,
data.
I'm a huge fan. Like
I
I had my blood work done, what was it, like 2 weeks ago? And sure, you get that report back from the lab and nobody explains to you what it really
yeah.
means. And they give you, here's your result and here's the normal range, and then you're either within the normal range or you're above or below it. And that
And then
is
they're like, bye.
and that's pretty much all you get. So what I did is, like, of course, I could ring my doctor and follow up and pay another $30 copay and spend,
Yeah.
scheduling it and all this. I just uploaded the information to AI. I was curious, and I got a really, really good read and recommendations and this and that. Now, with AI, you always have to make sure you verify, I would say,
Yeah.
the recommendations. But I do think it is, for people who just maybe don't understand the real important details here, is
Yeah.
that, I think it's incredibly helpful. So I'm a big fan. I would totally um buy into this. My well, no, or maybe it's more of a well, maybe. There's this huge they're like new protein bars on the market that are really high protein, but they have
Yeah.
engineered fats in them so they can deliver those proteins with very little calories. Um, and I'm just a bit worried about that one, I must say. When, the moment when you engineer the fats, remember, like, when it was in the 80s, margarine, for example, which was like the holy grail at one point. I always get a little cautious here, and maybe I'm wrong. I just want to be really open about that too. But I have always an instinct of, like, I just want to read a bit more about it. Do you have a perspective on those, or is it something you haven't really looked into so far?
Anything that's bioengineered for me is always kind of like red flag. So I always look into that and really want to understand what is going on there. And with those fats, it makes me think of, do you remember that Alestra that was like this hot, like it was like, oh, you can eat Pringles and you don't absorb any of the fat, but careful, you're gonna like poop your pants. So I think it's always like, all right, well, why are we including this in our food and what is the outcome? And with something that's a bioengineered fat, essentially that can't be broken down. So our body can't actually extract any of the fat components of it or the calories, which I guess is a good thing for some people. But to me, it's like, all right, what's the goal? Is it for weight loss? Is it for longevity? Like, what are we using that for? Because calories are so, like, a calorie in doesn't equal a calorie out. So to kind of base everything off of like a caloric value to me is a little bit like we're kind of missing the point there. So long-winded way to say I'm not into anything that's bioengineered, and I always have to like question it and give it time to really see like, well, how
Yeah,
does it affect
I
you?
would like to read the studies a bit more, because obviously, these things are studied and they have to be submitted as new ingredients, right? So to be GRAS, generally recognized as safe for the public. But I
Yeah.
want to read a bit more research, and maybe we'll do this on another podcast, but I was curious for this one. And then how about protein for weight loss? That's obviously a big, big topic right now. Is that a well yes or well no?
So, well, heck yes.
All right, brilliant. Okay. So let's go to the RD rapid fire, which I
Okay.
absolutely love. And let's do RD rapid fire protein edition. And as always, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the best, how would you rate the following sources of protein? Tofu.
7,
This is an interesting. Bison meat.
10,
Wow. Okay. Beans.
8,
Protein bars.
5.
Brie cheese,
4.
lab-grown meat,
2.
yogurt, perhaps flavored yogurt,
I would give that a 6.
fish,
10.
high-fiber cereal,
2.
raw milk,
9.
and nut butter. Actually, I have 11 today. That's amazing. So how about nut butter?
Nut butter, I'd give that a 3.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yes.
This was awesome, Sarah, as always. Really appreciate your thoughts around proteins. It's a really trending topic, and I think I learned a lot today, and you made it much more digestible, literally speaking, to understand how much protein one needs. So I really appreciate your thoughts here. Also, before we conclude, massive thank you to Brooke, who produced this show, and also Fatima, who is assisting us on the sound and on the lighting, etc. So that's the wrap for today. As always, I see you very soon. And if you like this, give us a follow on YouTube or subscribe to our podcast wherever you are accessing it from.